Hello, 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 guys. It is Sunday, October 16th, and we are here today for our afternoon tea light with Jeannie Lin. I'm very excited. I first met her when we were on a panel together for the Historical Novel Society in 2021. I don't know. I don't know what year it is. That's okay. But it's going to be really fantastic. If you haven't read any of her books yet, you really ought to. It's fantastic. And I can't wait to just delve into writing and history and everything with her. She's really fantastic. So here's her bio here. Jeannie Lin started writing in 2005 while she was teaching school, which I'm sure a lot of us can appreciate, having day jobs while we write. After a long journey through rejections and contests and revisions, her manuscript, Butterfly Swords, won the 2009 Golden Heart Award for Historical Romance. Her first two books have received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly and Library Journal, and her second novel, The Dragon and the Pearl, was listed as one of Library Journal's best romances of 2011. That is touching on what all Jeannie has been awarded lately. Unfortunately, I could only find a little bit of a dated bio, but her books have been included in best of romances, best of historical fiction. So actually, I think maybe it went, but in a historical romance. That's how we know each other. So that's where I'm paying attention. Her stories are inspired by her love of adventure, history, and fantasy in both Western and Asian traditions. I'm going to stop there because we have so much to talk about, and I'm super excited to have her on. So let's welcome Jeannie.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for being on the show. So anybody who wants to drop in a question or a comment, please do in the comments, and we'll chat about those. But to get started, you have been writing now. You've been publishing now since 2009. So you've got a 12-year span here.
Oh my gosh, when you say it that way, it sounds so long. Yeah, and one of the things I have to do is update that bio on my website because I have I can only hold I've learned that there's no such thing as multitasking, which means I can only hold so much in my brain at one time. And every time I do another event, I'm like, I gotta update that bio. And of course, 5 minutes from now, I will not remember this. So
Yeah. That's why I have this really messy, awful to-do list that is like just right next to my computer, and I basically just ignore it.
Yeah, it's aspirational. Yeah. That's what I like to say. Like those to-do lists are aspirational.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I get really excited about every time I see your name on one of these lists is like, oh, I know her.
I get excited too. I'm like, oh my gosh, is that me?
So I'm kind of gonna, I guess, because not Margaret says hello.
Hello.
So I kind of want to give an overview for people who may not be familiar with your work. So you have steampunk books, the Gunpowder Chronicles. Here, I'll even pop up this like handy dandy graphic so people can see what we're talking about.
Oh, I love this platform, by the way. I'm just one of the actually, I've been an audience member, and I kept on thinking like I have to figure out what platform they use. And so now, that went on my to-do list, and now that I finally checked that off months later.
Yeah, no, it's really fantastic.
Yeah.
So we have up top there, we have your steampunk novels, the Gunpowder Chronicles. And then you have some Harlequins, which are down at the bottom there. Those Butterfly Swords, The Dragon and the Pearl, My Fair Concubine, and The Sword Dancer. Then I guess they're historical mysteries. The Lotus, and then the Jade Temptress. Those are the two that I have read of yours. And so I'm going to talk about those because those are the ones I know best. But one of the things that really struck me about those are the similarities to Regency categories, because it has a lot of the same genre, like check boxes. So I don't know. I feel like I would be, I don't know, talking over you, talking out of turn to talk about what they are. So would you mind taking over and talking about them?
Yeah, well, you mean the categories, or well, definitely. I think when I first was writing, I was writing historical. I was writing historical adventure. I like you like heroines who are adventuresome and kind of breaking the mold a little bit. And people would say like they would start reading it, and I think at that point there wasn't much of a market in historical romance for Asian settings or Asian characters, and so everyone said, well, this feels like it should be upmarket, it should be in the realm of Amy Tan, Lisa C, that kind of thing. But that's not what the story was at all, and I would be surprised if people would say that. They would just see the setting and say like, well, it doesn't belong here, it belongs in women's fiction or literary fiction, which is not bad. I'd love to go there, but at the time I was writing those stories, these were adventure novels and they were romances, and they were very much like you said, they weren't exactly necessarily following the Regency mold, but they definitely were written to be historical romances. And I thought I felt squarely in that genre. As much as people say that my stories are, groundbreaking or outliers, I was like, to me, they just feel like, that's where I wanted them to be. And so that's what I pushed. So it was very intentional that I love historical romance. That was pretty much where I still read a lot of romances. I read romance. I read all over the map, but I tend to love historical romances, and that's what I wanted my stories to be starting out. And so, Butterfly Swords, Dragon the Pearl, definitely right squarely. That's where my head was. And then moving on to the Lotus Palace, that's where I wanted to now that I had gotten my feet wet a little bit, I wanted to expand. And similarly, there's many mystery series, many historical mystery series that I'm in love with. And so I've always been writing from the I guess the perspective of a fangirl. All the stories that I love. I was just talking to someone online about Brenda Joyce's Deadly series, and that was like a historical mystery series that I loved. And I definitely could see the DNA of that in the historical mysteries that I started writing.
Last month we talked with Catherine Stein, who writes steampunk, and she said, and I thought this was great, that everything is fan fiction. That even Dante's Inferno is Bible fan fiction. And I was like, oh, that's so good.
That is good. Now I'll have to use that, but I'll credit it correctly.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really good because fan fiction and romance both kind of get docked for being somehow lesser.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, I mean, they're still valid.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. Hist-mist. That's pretty good. Yeah. His mystery.
Margaret's got a good question. What is your favorite portmanteau for historical mysteries? It's a
yeah, Hist-mist. That's pretty good. I think I always say historical mystery, and then when you throw romance in there, it's one of those things where depending on who I'm talking to, I will qualify or not, or depending on how complicated we want to get it. Because I think romance readers are they're fine with mashups. Like mashups are just what we do. And then I think when I speak with other audiences, sometimes they get a lot more particular about what exactly is in this book. I don't like doing the warning label. I don't like doing the romance warning label because it shouldn't be a warning label. It was actually a fellow author buddy of mine who said early on, she was like, yeah, I don't apologize for the sex, because what if you're you're at a signing and you're like, oh, and by the way, there's sex in that, if that's okay with you, kind of thing. And she's like, but then what if that reader really loves the sex, and then now you've shamed him for liking the sex because you made it like it's a bad thing. So yeah, so that's why it's a mouthful sometimes, is just listing off all that's in there, but none is a warning.
Yeah, all the best genres together.
All the best genres, yes.
Yes. That's really interesting what you were saying about not wanting trigger warning, because sometimes I go back and forth, because I mean, I do feel like, especially with romance writers who are such avid readers, usually, reading like a book or 12 a week, that then they want their favorite tropes. They know what they like. They're looking for something specific. And especially when you have things like violence, or specifically like sexual violence in books, like be really hard for certain readers. But yeah, at the same time, how much do you put the onus on you as the writer versus on the reader for knowing ahead of time what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tough one because I think, you know, and definitely in the Lotus Palace series, because it is sex work, and there is trauma, as part of many of the storylines. That's something that I'm cognizant of. But again, it's a hard one. It's one of the things where, you know, I don't disagree with trigger warnings. I was more specifically talking about apologizing about being romance, but yeah, trigger warnings I think are definitely valuable, and I think that there are a lot of in the reader reviewer space, there's a lot of conversation about what's in the books and things like that I think are very valuable. And people who are looking for a particular type of book, especially in romance, the conversation is just always flowing. So I feel not that I'm not concerned, but I feel like it will come out, right? So people will ask, they'll say like, hey, you know, Jeannie Lin, does this one have a happy ending? You know, kind of thing. Like, is it going to be HEA? And the conversation comes out, and the community will discuss about it. You know, something that I wasn't cognizant of is that there's a trope that and this is, I guess this is not, again, not to apologize, but there's a trope that I would never think would be a triggering trope, but that I do all the time, which is, female dresses, you know, like the cross-dressing kind of trope, you know, and I have that all over my books. And a reader brought up that's sometimes that's often triggering for them. So whenever there's that sort of trope, they want to make sure that you know, it's not going to be triggering. And so I was like, oh wow, again, like I would never think of that as a triggering trope, but I could totally see what they were talking about. But I just my hope is just the flow of conversation, at least in the romance book world, can hopefully cover that. If people are looking, like for this person, they were a little bit on warning, you know, for my books, just because they knew that it was very, very common, and they knew because they had seen reviews of my books and things like that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the history here too. Because so one of the things that, I mean, obviously this is a historical fiction platform. So one of the things I want to talk about here is, so in your steampunk books, so on your blog, so I do encourage everybody to go to her website, jeannielin.com, because if you're interested in history, this is a great spot for it. Oh, Hellblazer says Gunpowder Alchemy and Clockwork Samurai are
that like I love it when people discover those books because they feel so weird to me. They feel like they're such geeky little adventures, but
oh,
I'm glad
really?
when people love them. Yeah, they feel like they feel weirder than my normal books even. But anyways.
Yeah, so how come?
I think it's like a niche of a niche of a niche. Is how I'm like, yeah, you'll hear about like, okay, I'm trying to expand my readership, and so you'll try like another genre. Like authors will try another genre, and I'm like, I must have the worst instincts in the world when it comes to expanding my readership, because it'll be like, oh yeah, I'll expand it to another genre, you know, Chinese imperial history plus steampunk. Let's how further niched could I make myself? And that's how, with you know, with geeky math and science history, you know, oh yeah, what branch of history would be great to delve into? Oh, the history of mathematics and science in Asia. Yeah.
Well,
oh, Main Street. I have to tell Emily that there was a shout out to Main Street Books. They are amazing. That's like I consider them my home bookstore. I have spent many an hour and many a dollar in that store. That's where I buy my children. My children like to go there and browse books as well.
Oh, fantastic. Oh yeah, and Margaret says we love a steampunk spinoff. So yeah. Well, I wanted to encourage people who are interested in history to go back onto my original thought here, to go to your website, because you have on your website the history of your world building, which is fantastic. So I'm just reading off of your website here because I mean, because I can, because who doesn't love primary sources? So you say, and here, the gunpowder alchemy is an alternative history that takes place in China in the years after the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, and the Second Opium Wars, 1856 to 1860. So you talk about in here not only what actually happened, you also talk about the things that you changed, the things that surprised you when you were researching, and you talk about the science that you use to go to do your world building, which is fantastic. So you talk about the one big change to the imperial structure was the addition of the Ministry of Science to the traditional six ministries. The actual imperial exams didn't include sections in mathematics or science, these topics being largely relegated to the areas of trade. So I guess really, I basically want to say my history nerd heart loves that that you are even giving readers a chance to think about it. And that I'm gonna see, I feel like that Wayne's World, the whole talk amongst yourselves. Oh. Oh, okay. Whew. Okay. Sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, and I think that as both, here's an interesting bit of trivia. History was always my weakest subject in school. And I think it was because, you were studying whatever they told you to study, and you were studying the way they told you to study it. Whereas if students were allowed to like pick an area and really dig into it, then all of a sudden it becomes interesting. That's when history became interesting, is when I started writing historicals. But I was always I was definitely a science person. And so, researching this, it kind of hit all my little geek buttons perfectly. There was science, there was history, there was, again, romance, adventure, all that stuff. And I think that I always felt kind of, as a historical author and then branching into steampunk or branching into another genre, it's hard to like pull too far away from the history, just because you find the history so fascinating. And there's a bit of like skeletal structure that history provides. And if you pull too hard on it, I feel very Doctor Who, like these points are fixed. If you pull too hard, you kind of like pull apart the skeleton. And then so I think that's what I felt during the steampunk. I kind of wish that I could have, talk about regrets. I wish I could have like expanded my imagination a little bit more, but I was always just so fascinated by the actual history of things that it was always grounded in that.
That's fantastic. So McCall is asking, I love it when authors bring in science from the past. And where do you go to research Asian science history? Is it?
Wow, yeah. So I read a lot of academic articles. There's actually a whole, okay, I'm gonna try not to get too geeky. There's a whole series. There's all the oh, that's right. This is the talk where you can get totally history geeky.
Yeah.
I believe it's Needham, Needham. There's a whole series of like Asian science history. I think it's Needham, but this is just off the top of my head. I haven't looked at my notes recently. And then so that was a good place to start, but you always have to be very careful, because when I don't read, I'm not I'm Vietnamese, so I can read Vietnamese slightly, but I don't read Mandarin or Chinese. And so you always have to be careful when you're reading Western sources about Asian history, because there's like a mindset, or a certain colonial kind of mindset and things like that you have to be careful of. So I was always kind of careful of that, but I used that as a starting point, and then really started digging into like, what were people feeling in terms of, there was actually a lot of interest in Japan and China during that period. So it was kind of the period where both the Western world was discovering China, and China was not discovering, but also really interested in the Western world, which is quite cool. And so there were Dutch and Portuguese scientists and mathematicians who were in the Chinese court. That's all true, and so there was actually a lot of cross-pollination in that time, and so I started with some of the sources, older sources about that, and then just branched out from there. But what I was always researching was translations. So that was like kind of the warning is, I would read translations of like Chinese texts on science, and they would actually reference Western mathematicians, and it was just really One of the things that's always been my id list, if you're into like Jennifer Lynn Barnes and id list, one of the things that's always on my id list is all of a sudden finding how the world is connected.
Mhm.
Like I was always fascinated by the thought that, Shakespeare wrote at the same time as like Cervantes and just like when you put the timelines of the world together, like when we learn them in school, it feels so disjointed, but when you like slide the timelines together, you're like, wow, there's this cross-pollination, and there's some Chinese works, the Peony Pavilion and things like that, where you can slide it and you can see like what works were popular in the rest of the world during that time, and a little harken to Lisa C there. And when I saw that, I saw like kind of these commentaries that kind of crossed Western, Eastern, realms of thought. I was just really kind of a little geekgasm moment for me. Um, like probably went way more into the historical research that actually got on the page, but it was just it was really inspirational. And so I guess my steampunk series was almost my excuse just to do all that research.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So if I can ask, like, what about Chinese history is specifically it drives you to that? Because you've written all these books and they're all set there.
Yeah. This is a great, you know what, this goes back to your Regency England. Goes back to your Regency England question in a roundabout way. And I think when first of all, I enjoy reading historical romance, and England, the Regency England is almost a bit of like a Disneyland for historical romance authors, right? It's like, yes, this is Regency England, Austen land, now Bridgerton land. Um, and it's like thought of, whether or not it's true, thought of as this idyllic time, ideal and ideal,
Mhm.
IDYLL and ideal time, whether or not that was true. Um, and so everyone kind of fantasized about that era, wanting to be there, wanting to immerse themselves there. On the Asian side, the Tang Dynasty in China holds very much the same place on for Asian culture. There's a lot of Asian movies, and there's like a great time travel series that's really popular where they go back into the Tang Dynasty, things like that, or they'll reimagine the Tang Dynasty, and that's the first dynasty I wrote in, and it was almost, if I could make an analogy, the Tang Dynasty is almost like the Regency England of Asian fiction, or things like that, because it's considered a golden era, whether or not it's true, right? There was, as we know, a lot of complexities, but it's considered a golden era. Women had a little bit more independence, mathematics flourishing. Chinese civilization was, I would say, at that point, the pinnacle of civilization, or considered at that point. Chang'an was like the largest city in the world at that point. There's this great infographic where you can kind of see like the largest cities in the world. Oh, this is a great geekery thing. If you're a history geek, there's an infographic that shows the largest cities in the world. And as you watch the cities grow and shrink, and then civilizations that disappear. Have you seen this?
I
And
have
you'll
seen
see like the civilizations that disappear and stuff. And the wonderful thing is you'll see Chang'an, like the Tang Dynasty capital, hugest city, and then like Beijing, Shanghai, and then at some point you see London cross, like you'll see London and the Chinese cities cross, and London becomes larger, and that is the time where my Gunpowder Chronicles series is set,
Oh, you
where
just chills.
yeah, the
That's
centers of the Western centers start emerging, right? The industrial, ushering in
Mhm.
the Industrial Revolution, everything like that. But if you watch the infographic, you see China, kind of get overtaken by the populous cities of the Western of the Western world at that time. And like I said, one of my id lists is just how the world is connected in this way. And it might just be, because my family came from Vietnam and I'm living in the US, and that's just part of the sort of things that keep me up at night and give me joy, I guess, thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. There are so many different conversation we can branch off of from this point. So I'm going to pick one here.
Okay.
So when talking, there's another thing that you have on your website that you were talking about sort of the translations that you can do, and how when you are writing about Chinese history into Western culture, so it's so it's being written in English, but your specific entry onto your website is talking about names being translated or not being translated. But I feel like this is also the larger question that we have as historical authors of any stripe, is how do you translate even English, from that time and the mores of those times to today, where a modern reader can not even accept them, but understand them, understand the mindset of these people and what they'll buck against and what they'll not buck against. Like,
Yeah, that was a while. I want to start my answer with a caveat. So first, I want to say that I've been writing for 12 years, and I feel outdated sometimes, and I'm now aware of my outdatedness. And I think that I have to anyone trying to answer that question now has to look at what the readership is like now. Because there has been much more of a push toward, let me put specifics on it. The idea of italics, a simple idea, right? It's like, oh, if you're translating something, put italics on it. Or if it's a word in, if it's a foreign word, put italics on it. And there's a move and a push now to be like, don't put italics, normalize the fact that this is just a word in another language. And readers will get it from context. Don't other the language, right? Don't other the foreign words is the thought there. And I've been back and forth on that because I'm like, well, it highlights that this is a foreign word that you're dropping in there. And then I think Daniel Jose, I'm getting his name wrong. Daniel Jose Older had a blog on it. That's very, anyways. So yeah, but at the same time, Spanish is maybe a little bit more familiar to a lot of readers than Mandarin or Chinese, and even Japanese. A lot of Japanese words are not italicized, but Chinese words are. Even in Harlequin, when we not Harlequin, sorry, Berkeley, when we published originally the Gunpowder series was through Berkeley or through Intermix. Same thing. I was like, why are these words italicized and these words not italicized? And it was just some sort of random decision, right? Of like, oh, these Japanese words are well known, like katana. These words are not well known, so they're italicized. And it felt that was like one of the things that made me kind of realize, I'm like, yeah, one, it's kind of arbitrary now, and you're othering certain cultures. Japanese culture was not getting othered, Chinese culture was getting othered, right? And it made me kind of think towards a lot of the opinions I'd had in the past about just how do I do this. There's no right answer, and it's one of those, I guess, burdens or responsibilities you have to continually ask yourself. But in terms of naming, similar, like I'm cognizant of a couple of things. I don't want names to sound the same. It would be the same consideration I would be if I'm like, your hero's name is Nathan and your heroine's name is Natalie, and now it's a little bit of that. But I mean, and I'm gonna lay it out on the line here. There are, I think, some harmful things that I do. For instance, I'll be like, this name doesn't sound masculine enough, so I'm gonna pick a more Western masculine name, and that I feel just arbitrarily that this feels more masculine. I am going to pick a name that I think Westerners will be able to, that it's easy on the eyes, right? It's easy on the eyes, and it's not going to stop them. Like when you're reading a fantasy novel and all of a sudden you hit like, Dune Arrakis, and there's like a gazillion names. You're like, some of those names do stop me. And it's okay because a fantasy reader expects to be stopped, but maybe a historical romance reader doesn't expect to be stopped. But I'm calling my own self out and saying like, yeah, this sort of weird mathematics that I was doing to try to fit in, I can see that there's some harm in there, right? And I've read things where people have called this out, like saying like, hey, it's harmful if you're telling authors like, don't put too many foreign words, right? Because I've gotten that critique for me, and I have probably said stuff like that, like, oh, I'm very cognizant about not too many foreign words, but it's harmful, for an author to hear that, right? And a reader to hear that, oh, your language is not okay. Your language is too other. And so I'm calling myself out. I still make those considerations. But sorry, there's a fly.
That's okay. I thought maybe you were just
I'm like gesturing like crazy.
I feel a lot about this, and I would say yes. I also feel.
Yes, exactly. And so I think, I think it's something I'm definitely more cognizant. I'm glad that people are calling this out now. I fully admit that I probably said very harmful things in terms of this, but at the time that Butterfly Swords came out, like no one had rules for me other than saying that I was not going to get published because it was just not, there was no place for me, right?
Yeah.
So I, for better or worse, had to make some very arbitrary decisions, and maybe some of them weren't arbitrary decisions, and for better or worse, try to get myself in. And I think it goes back to just my own personal experience. At the time that I was going to school, this was 1975 was when I was born. It was right at the end of the Vietnam War, huge influx of refugees to this country. And so I was part of that first wave of children growing up in the US who really just had to try to fit in. And for better or worse, we just had to make a call. Some people gave up or didn't name their children Asian names. Right. And for the same reason, right? Like I didn't mean to get this deep, but it goes back to that, like saying the same things that I'm saying about like, oh, don't other your characters too much. Other it a little, but if it's going to help them fit in and things like that. So it's a
that's when
issue with lots of cultural
stuff
behind it.
Well, that's when you get into that, like, I have so many things that are like running through my head really quickly. So I'm thinking about it in terms of like, by othering it just a little bit, then you get into that fetishization realm. And and that happens, I feel, in any culture. And it's also really weird because the English language is so much of an amalgam of other languages. So it's almost like, well, why would you italicize anything at this point? Because we've taken so much from French, we've taken so much from German, we've taken so much from Spanish, from Japanese, like, why would you at this point, really?
Yeah.
Especially with the influx of technology and how many new words we've had in the last 50 years. You wonder, like, why would you at this point, like, what would now be in the form of italicization if
Another kind of interesting thing about that, and it's actually coming back to the story I'm writing right now, which is set in the Lotus Palace world, is sometimes I will use a translated name, like these women are courtesans, and it's almost like a stage name, right? So for them to be called Pearl or to be called Sparrow, that was a purposeful, although I do mention their actual names, what the word actually is within the course of the stories. It's one of those things where there was an intentional decision made to give them these names, because it's almost like a stage name. It's the way a celebrity would have a stage name. So then seeing that, this name means Pearl, or something like that, has an intentional purpose. So there's a lot of thought that goes into why one way or another, whether or not it ever shows up on the page. Just know that there was a lot of midnight angsting about all of it.
So much angst. So much
angst.
I'm thinking about that too. And because I also have a story where I'm a fighter has a stage name, and I'm like doing it right now. Like, is she going to go? I was wanting it to be like a very overtly feminine name because she's a boxer. And so I was thinking, oh, should it be something like Ruby or something that would be like, a jewel or,
see, so same thing. It's like, and as a person who's kind of a public figure in a way, a historical equivalent of a modern day celebrity, it might ring like they might want a name like that.
Yeah. And I do want to quote what you say in one of your blogs here, or in that naming section that you have on your website, that you say, as my linguistics professor used to say, language is a dialect with an army and a navy. And I really loved that quote. I mean, it's a great quote, because of all the things that we're talking about and how political language is inherently, because of
Yes.
how we name and what we use to call things, and what sounds masculine or feminine. And
Yeah, and I think that's something like in the historical reader field, people recognize that. I think a lot of times, and because it's part of the discussion of culture and empire and things like that. And so yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate that it is recognized. It's like whether or not it's a conversation, whether or not it was a conversation in sort of the romance field when I started out, it was a conversation I had to have in my head, just having to navigate language and culture all the time, and so there was no, throwaway, oh, it's just a category romance. Although I don't think Regency England is just a category romance either, but you
yeah,
know.
yeah. But I mean, it is, you get into some fraught areas, but it is an interesting thing that everybody kind of has to talk about. So I'm going to use that to kind of transition into this blog post that you have from April 30th that, to be honest, really resonated with me. Maybe it's because of where I am in my career, where, as the kids say, I'm a try-hard. I try really hard all the time. And there is so much that put all this effort and all this thought, and your whole life is revolving around all these things, and then you have no sales. You're going to appearance after appearance, you're showing up at conferences, you're blogging and tweeting, and then you're like, oh, I sold one book last week. Awesome.
Yeah.
And
I feel you.
or you win a contest and you're like, look, I won this prestigious contest. Look, I did all these things.
Yes.
And people who don't really know are congratulating you and saying, oh, how great is this? You're really making it. You're really doing it. And then you're like, yeah, and I am in the hole $1,500 because of all of the stuff that I just did. So that blog post that you made, and it seemed like it was prompted. You made one of these top 100 lists of like best historical romances of the last 50 years.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was like the top most influential romances in that last 100 years or something like that. And when you see your name like next to, like, you see your book next to like Brenda Jackson, who's a legend, right? And then you see your book next to E.L. James, who sold more books than I have hours in my life, kind of thing. Not even counting how many books I've sold. And then you see your book kind of sandwiched between that type of title, and I was just like, I literally curled up, and wanted to never see the world again. And I was surprised. It's, I've been trying hard for a long time now, and you think that you're immune to this stuff, and then it's and then something like that hit, and it sort of hit right in the cusp of a lot of very tender things. So April 30th is also the anniversary of the fall of Saigon, which is an important day in the history of my family. But it's also kind of like the start of Asian South was it Asian Pacific Islander History Month, and a lot of times I get asked to blog during that time. And again, it was very tender because you're like getting asked to blog and say these things as a representative of this and that, and it was just, and you feel like, and I've sold like 10 books this week, and people are looking at me like I should be better than that, that kind of thing. And I think that just I felt like it was imposter syndrome. I was like, oh, the imposter syndrome just like smacked me in the face really hard at that point. And I was speaking with my counselor, normalize mental health.
Oh yeah.
I was speaking with my counselor, and she was like, well, because I was like, maybe all of it is imposter syndrome. Maybe the reason I'm burnt out, maybe the reason why I quit my job, maybe all of it's imposter syndrome. Like I was just like, it's all like, kind of surprisingly. And I was like, I'm just surprised how shook I was by that, because this is a good thing. It was a nice article, my kids were like, oh my gosh, mommy, um, yeah, like discussions around like, when it's your month, right? When it's Indigenous Peoples Month, or when it's LGBT, all of a sudden, if you're a representative of that, you're like asked to kind of like front and center all of a sudden, for better or worse. And yeah, I think that there's a little bit of emotional stuff behind it. But yeah, when I wrote that, my counselor was like, she kind of didn't accept the imposter syndrome thing, which bless her. And she was like, you know what, you've really been vulnerable, right? You've sort of taken the step, and you've been put yourself out there, for better or worse, and all of a sudden you kind of got taken out. And I was actually finishing a book and about to release a book then too, which is also a very tender, as you know, a very tender time for us, for authors. And then when she was like, so it's okay, you get a vulnerability hangover. That is emotionally taxing and trying. So rather than me kind of framing it as like, this is my weakness, I've got this thing, it's called imposter syndrome, and oh my gosh, she was like, look, you're exhausted because you get to be exhausted. You're emotionally drained because this is an emotionally draining thing. You've been vulnerable, and that's emotionally draining, and that's okay. And I was just like, huh. So not letting me further dig myself into this deficit hole of it, and this is why, and I've got imposter syndrome, and that's why I can't do things, and I'm gonna take it now. But that was what was fueling that post, is like, after speaking to her and after realizing like it was connected to a lot of things in my past, I was like, you know what? I've been judging myself by this standard that I thought that everyone else was judging me by. And I just wanted to flip the script, 45 years later, or, only 12 years since publishing, but 45 years since, being me, kind of thing. Yeah, anyways, I lost my thread there, but there was a lot of stuff behind that blog post. But it really kind of dug back to the beginning of when I first started publishing, but it even dug back further. I think writing is a form of therapy, right? It's very much a form of therapy. And anyone who says, if to someone who reads it, it might be a bunch of adventure stories, a bunch of love stories, a bunch of mysteries, but to me, there's a lot of digging deep to kind of drag out this stuff and get to play it out on the page.
Absolutely. And it's not always one-to-one. So like, to go on to this creativity thing, Margaret was saying that the vulnerability hangover is a thing. And I actually just had this discussion with a friend of mine who is a dancer and choreographer, who, due to an injury, can no longer dance. And we just had this big conversation about when you finish a project, whether it is a dance performance or whatever it is that you have been pouring yourself into, and I had just finished the manuscript for my book 4 and sent it off to the editor, and I had that hangover, the like, I can't do anything, I can't think, I am just, all I want to do is just like, sit in the bottom of my shower and cry, like, for no apparent reason. I have nothing to be sad about, and I know that, but like, it's just big. I just have these big feelings, as we say to my 5-year-old. And she was just reinforcing that and saying, yeah, it is a thing where you've put all of this effort and your heart in a lot of cases, and worked through whatever it is that you needed to work through, and they don't have to be a one-to-one metaphor. So like my Boxer and the Blacksmith book, to me, is about motherhood, even though there's nothing about motherhood in there. Not really, but to me it's a lot of that journey.
As they say, what was it, like, it's easy to write, you just have to open a vein and bleed on the page, and it's like, what? And then you get like crappy reviews, or you say like, oh, well, this was a nice simple little beach read, and you're like, yes, I'm glad you read it on the beach. Sure, people should read it on the beach, people should read it on a train, people should read it in the rain.
Yeah, with a
all that.
fox in a box.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you do say in that same blog post, though, that you say writing is the joyful part. And when you wrote that, you put joyful in all caps. And that was another part that just really resonated because I have been a writer my entire life. Just because I wasn't publishing it or showing it to anybody doesn't mean I wasn't writing.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and
I think that especially as we are trying hard, right? Sometimes I'm pushing so hard that I'm like, you actually start not writing, and then you start feeling less joy, and then and you get into the downward spiral of like, and I think that I've done that a lot. I've pushed really hard always to kind of get my name out there. And then at some point it was like, yes, maybe if I did another blog, maybe if I did another conference, I would get X. It all helps. Plus I am a little bit, I admit now I'm an extrovert. I do get energy from doing things and being around people and stuff, doing talks like this. But then you also forget that, hey, you get more disconnected from your writing, the stuff that reminds you like this is okay, this is worth it. And that's the thing, is the writing is what allows me to, like I said, the therapy allows me to walk through these emotions in a way that I can get something out of it, right? I will never be able to go back and fit in on the playground in 5th grade, right? But I can work it out on the page and come to a happy place and feel like I did something good for myself, like running.
yeah,
But yeah, that is the joyful part. As
yeah.
much as we angst about it, and I think I forget that, like my webpage. I'm like, is it between updating my webpage, which will exhaust me like immediately, or writing, which will recharge me? And I keep on not doing the things that exhaust me, like updating my bios. So
Same. And Margaret saying the tweet
oh,
recently, here's this thing I worked on for years, went to therapy for. Oh, thanks. I read it in a day.
there was a talk that I love, that Christina Dodd, she did a talk that I attended early on in my newbie phase of writing, and she was just talking about like writing. It's like, going on stage, pulling down your pants and like asking for comments. It's like, okay, here we go. Here's my best. Let it go. Kind of thing. Um,
Yeah. To be honest, there are some times that I would rather do that. That would be, I would, sure. Yeah. That sounds totally fine.
totally easy.
Yeah. Margaret says, so much of the hard part about publishing is that our work is such a personal achievement and we don't know how to have honest pride in that work. Oh, Margaret, you're killing me.
Yes, I think that
Whew.
I think that, and the blog post was a little bit of my turnaround for that. Is like, I'm going to be impossible to live with from now on, because I think that I'm just going to celebrate.
You should.
I'm going to celebrate, and I think you should too. I think everyone should too. And we always want to downplay. It's a very Asian thing too. I think it's to be humble. Just
I don't know.
swagger.
I'm
Put some
from a
swagger.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
from
just
the Midwest, where like the idea of bragging on
yeah.
yourself or talking about what you're doing rather than speaking about, oh, hey, did you see the snow out today?
And I think like there's a lot of people who I mean, look at all the people who brag who don't deserve it. So you're like, yeah, I deserve it.
Yeah,
I think that it's we have to celebrate a little bit more, and be, like I said, be happy, be joyful about it. Recognize that you've done a thing, and it's kind of awesome to do a thing. And like people always say, like this conversation we have a lot, like, oh, people think authors are so glamorous and this and that. I'm like, it is glamorous. This is glamorous. Maybe not, it's not like jet setting glamorous, but I'm talking with a bunch of readers and authors on a Sunday,
yeah.
uh you know
I was
geeking
thinking
out.
about the whatever that was, the Vogue or Vanity Fair or something I saw on Twitter recently, that was the author fashion, and it was like, this long coat and like fall colors, and I was like, where's the pajama pants?
Yeah, like I was gonna say, like, this may seem fashionable, but this scarf is attached to this sweater,
That's excellent.
And it's because my mother gave me this sweater because she feels that like sequins are pretty. And so I was like, okay, I with my sister right now. So I packed my clothes and it's a bunch of like workout clothes and things. And I was like, I've got one acceptable sweater. So yeah, so this is my fashionable sweater where the scarf is attached.
Fantastic. I am wearing yoga pants. So I will tell you that I am definitely wearing yoga pants. That's the nice thing about doing these is that I don't have to worry about my shoes or, I mean, I could have actually just told you.
Oh, I mean, and talk about the author wardrobe. It's like when you've, in 12 years, when you look at your Facebook memories and you're like, I've got one red dress. I've got one red dress that I've worn in every single conference since the beginning of time. The good news is I still fit into the red dress. The bad news is like, oh my gosh, change your dress.
Well, I have noticed for me at any rate, I don't know how if it's for you, but I noticed that every time I'm in like the last portions of writing a book, I gain like 10 pounds that month because I am just sitting there, right? I'm in like this like, panic mode of like, I must finish. And then like, I don't move my body.
Well, that's what I was like with the pandemic and not going out, not going to conferences and things like that. I was like, and not just the pandemic, before that, children, life, this and that, not doing conferences. I was like, conferences used to like keep me like kind of in a certain pattern, right? I'm all about habits. And it's like, well, I would have to like wear actual clothes when I go to conference. So I have to fit in my clothes because otherwise I'd have to like buy new clothes. I don't want to buy a whole new wardrobe, right? And when I stopped going to conference, it was like all bets are off. Like I fit in these comfy, the comfy stretch pants I write in.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, my habits are all amok now. Like,
yeah. No, and I'm kind of curious to see how things change and shift now that people are pretty comfortable online again. But things are opening back up at the same time. So I'm curious to see how many conferences can remain hybrid.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get to HNS. Like finally, that would be awesome. I'm planning on it. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, all that stuff.
Yeah, right. The one in Texas.
Yes, San Antonio, right? San Antonio.
Sorry, I was like S. Austin. I was like, it's not Austin. Brain, stop. But yeah, I am also hoping to be there as well. So hopefully we'll be able to sit there and
like see in person. Oh my gosh, I've never met you in person actually. That's right. Yeah, I've never met most people in person.
Yeah, it's hard. So I guess really my last question is going to be basically on the same thought here. You talk about in that same blog post about being an icon for being different. So because you're writing Asian themes, you're writing Asian historical romance, historical mystery, and oh god, we didn't even get to this. Holy cow, I even made a graphic. And also you have written historical erotica. And these are beautiful. And I love also on your webpage that you write about, I'm just keep them up for one more minute.
This is actually my most historically accurate series, by the way, or at least in terms of like following historical events, if any.
And I love trivia. Based on a real woman who had an over 30.
Yeah, the legend was, and again, history messes with women's lives, right? So I'm sure because her dynasty was not well loved, she probably got, it pretty, got a raw deal in terms of history. But yeah, she was believed to have had a whole harem of male concubines. And the slang for it means like pretty face or prime face. The slang comes from that era. It's her male harem. And so people say, when people are like, oh, I hate the name reverse harem. I'm like, no, this is literally the reverse harem. It is the reverse harem that, existed. And she supposedly made a special bed. I actually found her because I was researching beds. and it came up with her, like, I was like, beds, Imperial China. And she was the myth or the legend was that she had made a special bed so she could be serviced by all of her male harem, all at once. And I was like, that would be a very interesting bed. But
Yeah.
after seeing this little historical tidbit, I was like, I researched more, and I was like, first of all, I think got a really raw deal by history because, but also it was just interesting, like how of all of that was a very tumultuous time period, and it was like family members, Game of Thrones, everybody killing each other, assassinating each other, family member against family member, backstabbing, all this stuff, and for a woman's name, for one woman to emerge from that, right? For her name, like she was like Daenerys, she must have been like Daenerys, the mother of dragons, if you think of it. I was fascinated. How does a woman survive in that sort of situation, in that sort of scenario, and come out kind of infamous? And on top of that, there was a legend, like again, there was a myth about one courtier that she was attracted to, and she was like, "Give him to me." And the emperor says, "Okay, go." And then he supposedly was with her for 10 days. And then she let him go after that. I'm like, oh, come on. That story is too good. And I was like, but I want to write this story. But in order to write it, I have to write erotica. It's got to be an erotic story. Like, that was the only way I could see it happening. And then so I was like, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can write an erotic story. And my goal was I felt like in order to get into the psyche of this woman and why this legend emerged as it did, I just felt it had to be told as an erotic story to make sense in my head.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really, I didn't know about it until I started, putting together this stuff for us today. And now I'm like, oh, holy cow, like, tell me everything. Because there's so many shenanigans online about these myths of like, oh, well, women are actually like inherently monogamous. And you just want to be like, what? And so I love these points where you can say, no, when women have the opportunity, they are also like, we're all here. Like, can we not acknowledge that we're all just humans? Like, this is ridiculous. Oh, there you go, Margaret. I love this. Come to Paperland Providers for the history nerderies. Stay for the new genres to discover, like historical erotica. Yes, absolutely. Can I just make that as a commercial? Can we just do that? Like,
that's a good tagline. That's a good one.
So have you had it? I'm curious about response on this. Like, how have people responded to this?
I think at first I did it as a pen name, like, cause I was like, okay, it's way hotter. And then it's really hard, by the way. We forget how hard it is to get a platform. Like, we have spent so much, like you said, trying all this stuff to get your platform. Releasing a new pen name was really, really tough. And I was like, this is so hard. And then I thought, you know what? I don't think my readers will shun me for this. I think they'll read it. And then so I sort of just combined the names. And so I found that people who read me will follow. They'll follow me, which they say that's small but loyal. I have a small but loyal following, and they'll follow. And they say that's if you have a strong voice, people will do that. And I was like, this must be what they're saying. People will follow me to different genres, and so no one seems highly offended, and they know enough that they won't read it if they don't want to. And I think people were more not upset, but people have criticized it more for being in first person than they did for it being erotic, like super erotic. Like, I wouldn't even categorize it as erotic romance. It is erotica, historical erotica.
Cheers to that.
And then it's I think the response has been good, and I feel like just the splitting of the time, I people ask about it, like, will there be more, and I think I just had to be in a particular mood to write that series at the time I did. So I feel like I haven't fed that part of the dragon as much as I should, and it's something I definitely would want to feed a little bit more, but it just was a particular mood. In that series, in that vein, I have a historical like an erotic horror that I have in my head. But again, I haven't done erotic horror. I just feel like the story needs to be told as horror, and I have not written horror at all, historical horror, erotic. Um, so yeah, so response has been good, and I think I just have not been able to like pump more blood into that area, which I wish I could.
Well, I mean, it does get into when you start talking about erotica, like there are different parameters and platforms and selling. Like Amazon is really weird about it.
That's another thing, yeah. So it got dungeoned. But like for instance, Vella, Kindle Vella doesn't seem to have a dungeon. Not that I would, and I actually originally wrote this. It's very serial, right? So it was episodic, and then I put it all together into one novel at the end. And I don't think it would fit for Vella, but I know of authors who are writing very hot, very steamy, very erotic for Kindle Vella, and those works are not dungeoned. And I think in the world of search, people are searching you out. If you're dungeoned, it's if you don't know, I mean, it's just if you get flagged as erotica, you will get put into the dungeon. And a lot of erotic romance, I guess we could say we started kind of tagging and marketing as just steamy romance versus erotic romance, because erotic romance, if it gets dungeoned, it doesn't show up in searches, and then you die a quiet and sad death.
So Margaret's just asking.
Yeah. So what it is there is if Amazon flags you, and they won't tell you, if Amazon flags your work, and you may not say that your work is erotic, if Amazon flags your work as erotic, it will not show up in regular searches. Like if someone searches for you directly. So if you search for, Shanyon, Jeannie Lin, or Shanyon, Liliana Lee, it'll still show up. But when people are looking for books, it just won't show up in the general search. And then if you think of just how much, and you can't advertise, you can't do Amazon ads, you can't do Facebook ads, all of that really makes it a lot tougher in order to get people to your erotic works. And then if you think that I'm already a niche, again, the niche of a niche, right? I'm already a niche work. People who are reading other erotic romances or other historical eroticas are not necessarily looking for Imperial Chinese works and stuff like that. So it makes it a lot harder to market. Yes, the brown paper, or like, back in the day when they had like the black lace books, and they'd have like the special covers that like
the special section.
Yeah, the special section and the special covers. It's like that. And so it makes it harder to find. I had forgotten about that, by the way, Edie. About all the difficulties for advertising. And that's why I was like, well, I mean, some people can say it's they can say like my work is actually steamy romance, but I'm like, no, I can't. It is erotic. I am absolutely, I cannot hide that fact, and I want to. And so, yeah, it was challenging in that way. I think just revealing that it was me helped a little bit to actually getting some eyes on it.
Yeah, it always makes me wonder, because it does feel like mainstream romance is becoming steamier and steamier, and so like you start to wonder, like, okay, well, where is the line? Like,
yeah,
there are some books out there that are, still marketed as mainstream romance. I'm thinking of like Katie Roberts and Neon Gods, and which is extremely steamy.
Yeah, but that is steamy, and I think if you get into erotica, there is definitely a line like for instance the Shanyon series is definitely sexual situations, sexual storytelling. Like it's more than just a story that happens to have a very steamy romance in it. It is sexual dynamics, power dynamics. That's why I was like, I think it has to be told as erotica. It is goes into some uncomfortable territory, things like that. But it had to be for the story, to be a woman of that time, to become that legendary. I think it had to go there. At least that was my feeling. So yeah, that's why I was like, I wouldn't want to not categorize it as romance, as erotica. Like I think properly that story should be categorized as historical erotica.
Well, and you wonder too, how much of women who have power are eroticized, essentially, historically. Like you think about Catherine the Great and the myths about her, Cleopatra, the myths about her. Like there are a lot of different things that you take a woman in power who does have a sexual appetite and is not ashamed of it, and then like how it just becomes a story of its own because everyone's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's just kind of
Absolutely. So there's a lot of stuff there, but like I said, like she had to be like the mother of dragons,
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
in order to become that infamous for they've made Chinese movies about her, but I haven't seen them, but I think that they softened her quite a bit.
Of course, make it palatable.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, be nice, smile. Everyone will like you more. That kind of thing. We should probably wrap this up.
This
But
has been
it,
so much fun though. I love historical geekery.
yes, yes. Oh, me too. Believe me. Margaret is just saying here, either fetishized as object or characterized as frigid.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We need more grayscale for sure. Um, yeah, but I'm so glad that you came on. I'm so glad we had this chance to talk. This has been really fun and
Yeah, this
fantastic. So
was.
yeah, so thank you so much. Yep, we've got other people saying thank you as well. So yay.
Thank you. I couldn't see I just see the comments, so hello to
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna pop you off for right now, and I'm gonna just tell everybody what to expect next. So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. And don't forget to go over to jeannielin.com, which is her website. You can find her books, the order in which they are published, and some of the historical background, which I know you're going to love. It's really a fantastic read there. It is, yeah, it's a lot of fun. So join us next month, November 6th. We are, I've got a graphic here so I can even tell you there. November 6th, Margaret is going to be on the show. She's got a new book coming out, Fabled Passages, which is a short story collection. And that should be another really great, great interview. I'm excited about that because we can geek out about everything. Anything else upcoming, you can always check with us at our Facebook group, Shine with Paper Lantern Writers. If you're not already in there, please join us. There's lots of great discussions and loads of content and authors and readers and historical geekery. It's pretty fun. You can also follow us on Instagram and, of course, our website where we keep all of our blogs, lots of new information about all of our different time periods and what we are all up to. And I will see you guys November 6th. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much.